Hello, this is Joe Uhan here to talk about blisters and toenail pain. The best treatment for these things is prevention, and it's not just a certain type of shoe or socks or applying something to your feet. Rather, it's how we run that plays the biggest role in what's happening with our feet. So there's really two forces at play that cause both blisters and toenail problems. The first is shearing force. And shearing is any time you have one surface kind of sliding along another. So whether that's a shoe and a foot, or any two surfaces, sometimes it's even the skin along other layers of skin, but a shearing force, that rubbing friction, is what causes blisters. The other force at play here is compression, and compression is that perpendicular force of something, usually our body, on an immovable object, either our shoe or the ground. So those are the two big forces that cause a lot of the foot problems that we see, and we have a lot of control over that. So the biggest things that cause both shear and compression happen in our stride, and we can control that and we can improve those things. So the biggest thing that we see that causes especially shearing forces is overstriding. And overstriding represents any time your body lands significantly in front of your center of mass. And you can kind of see and hear this, that if I'm back here and I allow my leg to land in front of my body, that is a braking force in this direction. And what happens then in the close-up of things is, if I grab a shoe here and pretend that this is my foot inside my shoe, is you're getting this happening inside the shoe. So there's two forces here at play. You've got the shearing on the underside here that's going to cause blisters. It can also, interestingly, kind of shear on the heel as well with overstriding, kind of going forward and up and down. But then you also have that compression, because inside that toe box, you're going to have your toes jamming into that shoe. So overstriding plays a huge role in that. So what we want to do instead is make sure that that foot is landing underneath us, which we'll talk about in a second. So overstriding is a huge one. The other one, interestingly, is what happens to our stride in this plane. So in an efficient state, our feet will land mostly whole foot with minimal pronation, and they should land either directly beneath us or just off to one side. So one of the things that can cause a lot of those kind of compressive and shear forces is something called a narrow, a lateral, or even a crossing over stride. So when you land in a tight single track can do this, is if you start landing super narrow, you can see what's happening in my foot. So rather than landing with a whole foot underneath, my feet are landing on the lateral margin like this. What that does is that introduces compression, I should say, overpronation forces in the shoe that can cause compression. Again, if my hand is my foot here, if I'm landing like this, the foot isn't meant to take forces like this. So that can be both jarring and painful for the toes, as well as then now you're up here and you get that hyperpronation. So then what can happen inside the shoe is, here's your foot inside the shoe and you're having this happening. So what can happen on this lateral aspect of that big toe is rubbing on the inside of that toe box. So that narrow stride, that plays a huge role, and it adds another dimension. And interestingly, a narrow lateral stride tends to also go with an overstride. So there's a couple simple but really powerful things that you can do to prevent that. So number one, don't overstride. And what that means is there's two components to that. There's a postural component to making sure that you're forward, and then there is a propulsive component of just starting with this mindfulness of not extending and instead having that foot land underneath the body. The second component then has to do with the foot strike in this plane, making sure that you're landing whole foot and engaging all five toes. It's really hard to excessively lateral strike if you're really thinking about getting on the medial aspect of your foot. So land whole foot, you're more likely to land here than land here, and you will get rid of those excessive pronation forces. The last one, which is kind of the hardest one, is to paw back. And paw back has to do with that kind of pulling of the foot between the lift and the push-off. This pulling or paw back action gets the foot onto the ground. And that does a really interesting thing, because inside our shoe, what'll happen if you overstride, you get this jamming in. But if you do a paw back, what happens is you land and you actually gap or pull your foot back into your shoe a little bit. And this is hugely important when we do downhills, which we'll talk about in a bit. But that paw back is a really powerful way to decrease that forward shearing and decrease that compression. So those are some things to work on. Practice those before you go into your target race. But those will play a huge benefit to avoiding those shearing and compressive forces that cause our foot problems. Good luck.